Everyone thought it was just another late-night accident. A car crash on a lonely road, a man pronounced dead before his wife could even reach the hospital. To the outside world, it was tragic, but simple. A grieving widow, a community in shock, a case closed before it ever truly began. But what if that accident wasn't an accident at all? What if the man who died that night was hiding secrets so dark that someone wanted him gone forever, or worse? What if the very person who was supposed to love him the most uncovered the truth and realized she had been living with a stranger all along? This isn't just a story about a husband lost too soon. It's about betrayal disguised as love. It's about money, lies, and a carefully staged cover-up. And as the pieces fall into place, one question becomes terrifyingly clear. Was this man the victim of a brutal plot? Or was he part of something even more sinister? By the end of this story, you'll never look at the word accident the same way again. At first glance, their marriage seemed like the kind people dream of. She was warm, kind, and devoted. He was charming, hard-working, the type of man who seemed to light up a room the moment he walked in. Together, they looked like the perfect pair, two people who had built a life rooted in love, trust, and family. Their friends described them as inseparable. They laughed easily together, hosted family barbecues, and were always seen side by side at neighborhood gatherings. When you looked at them, you saw stability. You saw comfort. You saw the kind of marriage that people aspire to have. She trusted him completely, with her heart, with her future, with her very life. He was her best friend, her confidant, her partner in every sense of the word. From the outside looking in, there was no reason to believe anything was wrong. But sometimes, perfection is just a mask, and behind closed doors, masks begin to crack. Asterisk to the community. He wasn't just a husband, he was a role model. He held a respectable job, was well-spoken, and always carried himself with confidence. Neighbors waved when he drove by. The local church saw him as a man of faith, always sitting beside his wife during Sunday services. Friends admired how attentive he seemed, the way he held her hand in public, the way he opened doors for her, the way he smiled when her name was mentioned. He had built a reputation, a carefully polished image of being not only a loving partner, but also a trustworthy, reliable man. People said things like, "He really loves her, you can tell." Some even envied their bond, saying it seemed unbreakable. But the thing about appearances, they're deceiving. Communities see what they're allowed to see. And while the world adored this man, his wife was about to discover that the version of him everyone admired was only one piece of a much darker puzzle. Asterisk, asterisk, looking back. She could remember the signs. They were obvious at first, just small details, easy to dismiss in the rush of everyday life. He had begun working later than usual, explaining it away with meetings that ran long. His phone, once left casually on the counter, was now kept in his pocket or turned face down on the table. Late at night, when she'd stir in her sleep, she could see the glow of the screen on his face, his expression tense. Whispering into the darkness, there were strange moments, too. Receipts in his jacket pocket from places she didn't recognize. And excuses that sounded just a little too rehearsed. When she'd ask questions, he'd laugh them off, reassuring her that everything was fine. And she wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. After all, he was her husband, the man she thought. She knew better than anyone, but behind those secret phone calls and unexplained absences was the beginning of a trail. A trail that would eventually lead to the devastating truth. Asterisk, asterisk, it was late in the evening when the phone rang. She wasn't expecting any calls. Her husband was supposed to be home soon. But instead of the familiar sound of his car pulling into the driveway, she was met with a trembling voice on the other end. "There has been an accident." Those 4 words shattered her world. Her heart dropped into her stomach as the officer explained. Her husband had been involved in a horrific car crash. His vehicle had careened off the road, tumbling down an embankment before coming to a violent stop. Emergency responders were already on the scene, but it didn't look good. The words blurred as panic consumed her. The drive to the hospital was a blur of flashing streetlights, tears clouding her eyes, and a deafening silence in the car. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she knew was that her husband, the man she'd built a life with, might be gone. But beneath the crushing grief, something small, almost imperceptible, stirred inside her. A flicker of confusion. Why had he been on that road?
Why at that time?
Asterisk, asterisk, at the hospital, chaos surrounded her. Nurses rushed past with clipboards. The smell of antiseptic burned in the air, and machines beeped in endless rhythm. Finally, a doctor appeared, face grim, voice steady. He didn't make it. The words landed like hammer blow. She collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably, her world collapsing around her. Family members gathered, some comforting her, others whispering quietly. They called it a tragic accident. But when investigators described the crash, the picture became murkier. His car had veered suddenly, almost deliberately, into the guardrail. No skid marks. No signs of braking. No attempt to swerve, just a straight plunge. Friends shook their heads in disbelief. He was always so careful, they said. Always a cautious driver. Even she couldn't deny it. He never sped. He never drank before driving. It was one of the things she loved about him, his sense of responsibility. So why did this happen? The question hung in the sterile hospital air like a shadow that refused to leave. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 3 cracks in the story in the days that followed. The official explanation was simple. An accident. Maybe he'd fallen asleep at the wheel. Maybe a mechanical failure. People offered condolences, food, and sympathy. To the community, it was a heartbreaking tragedy. But to her, something felt off. The police report said he was driving home from work, but he hadn't been working late. She knew his schedule. She knew the road he crashed on wasn't even the route he normally took. Even more disturbing, why had his phone been switched off hours before the crash? Then came whispers. A friend mentioned seeing him with someone unfamiliar days earlier. Another quietly admitted they noticed changes in him and edginess. A secrecy doubt at first, she pushed it all aside. Grief has a way of silencing doubt. But the more she replayed that night, the harder it became to ignore Dodd. It didn't feel like an accident. It felt like a story someone wanted her to believe. And for the first time, she wondered if her husband's death wasn't fate. It was planned. Asterisk, asterisk, grief lingers. But doubt lingers longer. At first, she wanted to believe it was just an accident. People told her to rest, to heal, to focus on the good memories. But something inside her refused to settle. Each time she looked at the death certificate with the word accidental stamped across it, her stomach twisted, and then came the first real crack. While sorting through her husband's things, she found his work badge still on the kitchen counter. If he'd been coming home from work, why was his ID sitting at home all day? Her hands trembled as she stared at it, her heart racing. He hadn't been where he claimed to be. The seed of suspicion was no longer just in her mind. It was alive, demanding answers. She went to the police with her concerns. At first, they were sympathetic but dismissive. Car accidents happen every day. They didn't want to believe there was more to it. But the way her voice shook, the way her eyes pleaded, made one detective pause. What exactly are you saying? He asked. She swallowed hard. I'm saying, my husband's accident doesn't make sense. Asterisk, asterisk, Detective Harris wasn't the kind of man who let things slide. He had a reputation for following the threads others ignored. When the widow approached him, he expected the grief-fueled suspicions of someone in denial. But something about her composure, her details, gnawed at him. So he opened the file right away. Inconsistencies leapt out. No skid marks, no evidence of mechanical failure. His phone switched off an hour before the crash. No alibi for where he'd been that evening. It wasn't evidence of murder. But it wasn't clean either. Harris drove out to the crash site. Standing at the edge of the guardrail, he stared at the steep embankment. The angle of descent looked deliberate. Not a panicked swerve, not a sleepy drift. More like a decision. He found himself asking the same question the widow had whispered. Why? Asterisk as Harris pulled at the threads. A darker picture began to emerge. Financial records revealed something the wife didn't know. Her husband had drained thousands from their joint account in the weeks before his death. Even stranger, there were cash withdrawals in small amounts, spread across different towns. Almost as if he didn't want to be tracked, then came the phone records. Hours before the crash, he had received multiple calls from a number not saved in his contacts. When Harris traced it, his eyebrows shot up. The number belonged to a woman in another city, a woman with ties to him that no one had spoken about before. When confronted, the woman hesitated, then admitted they had been seeing each other. He told me he wanted to leave his wife, she said softly, avoiding eye contact. But he said someone was threatening him. Someone threatening him? That was the first time the case shifted from suspicion to danger. The accident was no longer just a tragedy. It was the beginning of something far more sinister, something planned, something hidden. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The knock on the mistress's door was polite, but heavy. When she opened it, Detective Harris stood there with his notepad tucked under his arm, eyes studying her carefully. She wasn't what he expected, not the flashy stereotype of an affair, but an ordinary woman in her late 20s, with nervous eyes that darted toward the floor. At first, she denied everything. She barely knew him. He was just a friend. But Harris wasn't convinced. He slid his phone records across her coffee table, the late-night calls, the whispered conversations that had stretched for months. The color drained from her face. Finally, she sighed. Okay, she whispered. We were seeing each other. Her confession cracked the case wide open. She described how he had promised to leave his wife, how he had claimed he was trapped in a loveless marriage. But there was something darker underneath her words. She kept repeating one line, almost like she was scared. He told me someone was after him. Someone who wanted him dead. The question burned in Harris's mind, was she telling the truth? Or was she part of the setup? Asterisk, asterisk, as investigators dug deeper into the mistress's life, more pieces of the puzzle surfaced. She wasn't just the other woman. She had financial troubles, massive credit card debt, eviction notices, and a history of shady relationships. Her connection to the husband suddenly looked less like romance and more like leverage. Neighbors told police they often heard the two of them arguing, sometimes late at night. One recalled a chilling statement she allegedly screamed during an argument. "If you don't do it, I will." Do what exactly? The neighbor couldn't say, but the implication gnawed at Harris. The mistress painted herself as a victim, but the evidence suggested she might have known far more than she admitted. Her debt, his secret cash withdrawals, and his sudden fear of being followed all wove together into a pattern that looked less like chance and more like conspiracy. And then there was the insurance policy. Asterisk, asterisk, and routine follow-ups. The insurance investigator revealed something staggering. The husband had recently updated his life insurance. The beneficiary? Not his wife. Not his children. The mistress thought it wasn't a minor update. It was $1 million policy filed just weeks before his accident. Detective Harris leaned back in his chair, the weight of it all pressing on him. Why would a married man secretly shift a fortune into the hands of a woman he supposedly just started seeing? The widow's heartbreak suddenly deepened into betrayal. She sat across from Harris, her hands clenched together, trying to absorb the revelation. "He left me with nothing?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "And gave her everything?" The motive snapped into focus. Greed, betrayal, deception. But Harris wasn't satisfied. He knew motive was only one piece. What he needed now was proof that this wasn't an accident, but a carefully orchestrated plot. And the mistress? She wasn't done talking. Under pressure, she let slip something that made Harris's blood run cold. He said, "If he didn't go through with it, they'd kill me too." They? Harris pressed. She froze. Silence. Who was they? Asterisk, asterisk, Detective Harris sat with his notes spread across the desk, the mistress's words echoing in his mind. If he didn't go through with it, they'd kill me too. But who were they? When Harris circled back to question her again, her story had changed. Now she said she didn't remember saying that at all. She insisted she was scared, emotional, and confused. But Harris wasn't buying it. The wife had her own version too. She revealed that weeks before the accident, her husband had grown distant, jittery, paranoid. He started checking the locks twice at night. He even installed a hidden camera by the garage, something he never explained. When she asked, he brushed it off, just being cautious. But cautious about what? Or about who? The more Harris listened, the more the lies stacked up. The mistress claimed she barely saw him near the time of the accident, yet phone records placed her with him hours before he died. The wife swore she had no idea about the insurance policy, yet a witness recalled hearing them argue about money just days before. The stories didn't add up. Someone was hiding something. Maybe everyone was. Asterisk, asterisk ordered a deep dive into the husband's finances. That's where the real picture began to emerge. Large cash withdrawals, thousands at a time. Just before his death, secret payments wired to accounts tied to unfamiliar names. Loan sharks? Numbers scribbled in the back of his planner. The numbers told a story more disturbing than the words. The husband wasn't just cheating. He was drowning in gambling debts, shady business dealings, and threats from dangerous people. The insurance policy wasn't just a gift for the mistress. It looked like a lifeline for someone who was desperate, someone trying to make sure that if he didn't survive, at least she'd have enough to pay someone back. And that single word the mistress slipped. They suddenly had a terrifying context. They could have been the people he owed. The husband wasn't living a double life of romance. He was living a double life of desperation. Asterisk, asterisk, it wasn't until Harris pulled security footage from a storage facility outside town that the true depth of the lies hit him. The footage showed the husband late at night visiting his storage unit. He wasn't alone. The mistress was there too. Together, they hauled boxes in and out, whispering nervously. One box was later confirmed to contain documents, financial ledgers, IOUs, and threatening letters with phrases like, "Final warning," and "Your family isn't safe." The unit was registered under a fake name, but one of the notes inside tied back to a local crime syndicate known for extortion and contract killings. Suddenly, everything clicked into a chilling new possibility. The mistress wasn't just a lover, she might have been bait, a way to control him. The insurance policy wasn't love, it was leverage. The accident wasn't misfortune, it was clean dash up dot, and perhaps worst of all, the perfect marriage. The perfect husband and the tragic accident were nothing more than layers of carefully crafted lies designed to hide something rotten. Beneath, the web was tightening. Every lie pulled the detectives closer to something that felt far bigger than just one man's death. Asterisk, asterisk, at first, the widow's grief seemed unshakable. At the funeral, she wept openly, clutching her children close, shaking hands with neighbors who whispered words of comfort. Everyone pitied her, the wife who lost her husband so suddenly, so tragically. But as days passed, Detective Harris noticed cracks in the image. When he visited to check in, she wasn't the devastated widow he expected. She was calm, too calm. Her answers to his questions were precise, almost rehearsed. She would say things like, "I just want to move forward," and "Dwelling on the past won't help my kids." For many, it was admirable strength. But for a seasoned detective, it raised a troubling question. Was this resilience? Or detachment? Then came the slip-ups. A neighbor recalled overhearing her tell someone on the phone, "I told him this would happen if he didn't stop." What this was, the neighbor couldn't say. But it planted a seed of doubt in Harris's mind. Was she truly the grieving widow? Everyone thought she was, or was she playing a role? Asterisk, asterisk, the financial review hit like a thunderbolt. When Harris traced the husband's accounts, he expected to see the mistress as the key beneficiary. But buried in the paperwork was something shocking. A second policy, smaller than the mistress's $1 million payout, but still significant in this. One named the wife as beneficiary, and she had already filed the claim, barely 2 weeks after her husband's death. Before the investigation had even wrapped, she had submitted paperwork to collect the insurance money. Harris stared at the timestamp on the documents. It was almost as if she had been waiting for the moment. Even stranger, her spending had already shifted. A new SUV appeared in her driveway. Credit card bills showed large purchases, designer clothes, jewelry, even plans for a family trip. The ink on her husband's death certificate was barely dry, and already she was building a new life. Grief? Or opportunism? The motive suddenly looked uncomfortably clear. Asterisk, asterisk, as detectives pulled deeper into her personal life, a very different portrait of the marriage began to emerge. Friends who had once described the couple as happy started to confess darker stories. One said she had often complained about her husband being controlling. Another recalled her saying she felt like a prisoner in her own home. A coworker swore she had used the words, "I wish he'd just disappear." Most chilling of all was a diary discovered in her bedside drawer. In it, amid rambling reflections about her life, were entries that seemed to hint at premeditation. Lines like, "When he's gone, I'll finally breathe again. It has to end somehow. I can't keep living like this." Were these just the venting words of an unhappy wife? Or the written seeds of a murder plot? Detective Harris's gut tightened. The perfect breathing widow was beginning to look like something else entirely, a woman trapped in resentment, who suddenly had money, motive, and opportunity staring her in the face. Asterisk. When detectives first asked the widow where she was on the night of her husband's accident, her answer was simple: at home with the kids. She claimed she had put them to bed early, stayed up watching television, then drifted off on the couch around midnight. On paper, it sounded airtight. A mother with her children in the house, how could she possibly be involved? But Harris had been in this game long enough to know that airtight stories often had cracks hiding beneath. He pressed her for details. What show was she watching? Did anyone call her that night? Did anyone see her? Her answers came too quickly, too neat. She rattled off the name of a TV program, but when Harris checked the broadcast schedule, the show hadn't aired that evening. She claimed she spoke with her sister on the phone, but phone records showed the last call had been days earlier. Her quiet night at home suddenly didn't sound so quiet. It sounded rehearsed. Asterisk, asterisk, the deeper Harris dug, the stranger the night became. Surveillance footage from a gas station less than 3 miles from the crash site captured something chilling. A car identical to hers pulling into the lot at 11:47 p.m. The driver's face wasn't fully clear, but the build, the hair, the posture, it looked disturbingly like her. When confronted, she denied it flatly. "That's not me. I never left the house." But detectives weren't convinced. Her kids, interviewed gently by child specialists, provided another clue. One of them admitted they had woken up in the middle of the night and gone to look for their mom. The couch was empty. The house was quiet. She wasn't there. So where had she gone? Those missing hours, the gap between midnight and 2 a.m., became the most dangerous part of her alibi. Hours she couldn't explain. Hours that seemed to overlap perfectly with the time of her husband's death. Asterisk, asterisk, when Harris pressed her again, her story began to crumble. First, she admitted she might have stepped out to get air, then shifted her claim to say she had gone for a short drive to clear her head. Later, she backtracked again, insisting she had stayed in all night. Each change was a crack in the dam, and Harris knew it was only a matter of time before the whole story collapsed. Then came the bombshell. A toll booth camera just outside town showed her vehicle crossing at 12:26 a.m., roughly the same time. Her husband's car was discovered smashed against the guardrail. There was no denying it now. She had been out that night and dangerously close to the scene of the accident. Her once sympathetic image of the heartbroken widow shattered under the weight of evidence. The neighbors who had comforted her now whispered suspicions. The detectives who once saw her as a victim now eyed her as a suspect. What had begun as a story of loss was rapidly morphing into a story of deceit. And the widow's alibi, the very thing she thought would protect her, had turned into the rope tightening around her neck. Asterisk, asterisk, Detective Harris stared at the board in the precinct's back office. Photos, phone records, and receipts were pinned up, red string tying names to places, times to motives, the husband, the wife, the mistress, and now the mysterious they. What jumped out wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the insurance. It was the way the threads overlapped. Phone records showed the mistress and the wife had spoken, not once, not twice, but dozens of times in the months leading up to the husband's death. And these weren't casual calls. They were late-night conversations, some lasting nearly an hour. When Harris confronted the widow about this, she insisted it was a mistake, that she barely knew the mistress. But the evidence didn't lie. There was a hidden connection between these two women, one supposedly betrayed, the other supposedly betraying. Why would a wife grieving her husband's infidelity be on the phone with his lover?
Unless she wasn't blindsided at all.
Unless she was part of it. Asterisk, the word they haunted Harris. The mistress's slip, if he didn't go through with it, they'd kill me too, had never left his mind. Digging deeper into the husband's financial records, Harris uncovered recurring payments to a local businessman known for his involvement in illegal gambling and loan sharking. Witnesses claimed the husband was in over his head, owing tens of thousands. He couldn't repay. This businessman had a reputation for making people disappear. And when Harris cross-checked his known associates, one detail made his skin crawl. The mistress had once worked at a bar that doubled as a hangout for his crew. This wasn't coincidence anymore. The husband's affair, his debts, the mistress's involvement, all of it pointed to a dangerous, criminal undercurrent. They weren't just a vague threat. They were real. And now it looked like both women, the mistress and the wife, might have been tangled up with them in ways no one expected. Asterisk, asterisk, part 3, a pact of silence as investigators circled tighter. A new theory emerged. What if the wife and mistress weren't enemies at all, but uneasy allies? One scenario chilled Harris. The wife trapped in a suffocating marriage, desperate for freedom. The mistress trapped in debt, desperate for survival. Both women, different reasons, same problem. The husband. Together, they might have struck a silent bargain. The husband's death would solve everything. She'd be free. She'd be paid. And they, the men in the shadows, would be satisfied. But if that was true, it also meant something even darker. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It wasn't just one woman snapping under pressure. It was a conspiracy, calculated, premeditated, and coordinated. When Harris finally got the mistress back into the interview room and mentioned the possibility of the wife's involvement, her face went pale. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. She just whispered, almost to herself, "We were both trapped.
We had no choice."
Asterisk, asterisk to the neighbors, he was the charming husband. The doting spouse who always waited while mowing the lawn, the guy who brought wine to block parties. A man everyone trusted. But when detectives dug deeper, the mask fell apart. Financial records showed a storm beneath the surface, maxed out credit cards, drained savings, and cash withdrawals that didn't add up. When they followed the money trail, the picture grew darker. He wasn't just in debt, he was gambling. He had been frequenting underground poker rooms, shady backroom casinos where debts could turn deadly. And worse, he wasn't gambling with just his own money. Records hinted he'd taken loans from the same loan shark Harris had been investigating. Tens of thousands. The kind of debt you don't walk away from without consequences. But that wasn't all. Surveillance pulled from nearby gas stations. And motels painted another image entirely. He wasn't a man slipping away for harmless poker nights. He was meeting strangers, exchanging envelopes, whispering deals. Was he being blackmailed? Was he laundering money? Every late night at the office suddenly had a new, sinister explanation. His double life wasn't just about infidelity. It was a spiral of secrets, crime, and danger dot, and it was all crashing down asterisk asterisk while the community rallied around the grieving widow, painting her as the innocent victim of a cruel twist of fate. Harris wasn't buying it. Something about her composure, her overly rehearsed answers, had always felt off. The breakthrough came when investigators checked her call logs. Hidden beneath the daily calls to her sister and coworkers were strange, encrypted apps most people had never heard of. Secure messaging platforms known for being used in criminal dealings. The logs revealed late-night conversations, not just with the mistress, but with others. Numbers traced back to known associates of the same loan shark her husband owed. And then came the discovery that made Harris's stomach knot. An email draft, never sent, sitting quietly in her account. The subject line read, "It's done." The body, "Payment as promised, no loose ends." If the husband was living a dangerous double life of crime and debts, the wife was no less complicit. She wasn't just the bystander. She was communicating with the same dangerous men. And based on her records, she wasn't drowning, she was orchestrating. Her double life wasn't born out of weakness. It was calculated, cold, a woman who wore the mask of grieving widow by day, while quietly pulling strings by night. Asterisk asterisk. The most chilling part wasn't just that both husband and wife were leading double lives. It was how seamlessly they fooled everyone around them. Friends at church swore the couple was a model marriage. His coworkers thought he was the dependable man staying late to support his family. Her neighbors thought she was the sweet, dutiful wife who baked pies for community events. But when detectives replayed their lives side by side, the cracks became glaring. The husband slipping away on business trips that were really poker nights and secret meets. The wife volunteering at night, which lined up perfectly with her calls to dangerous contacts. Both pretending, both lying, both actors in a carefully staged play. The tragic irony? They had been living in the same house, under the same roof, but building lies so vast that even they were trapped in their own performances. And when his accident happened, the performance ended for both of them. His life ended, her lives began to unravel. And what the world saw as a tragic widow was, in truth, a woman standing in the ruins of a life she helped destroy. At first, she refused to talk. When detectives brought her in, the mistress played the role she had perfected, the heartbroken lover who didn't know anything. She cried, whispered about how much she had loved him, how she never meant to hurt anyone, but Harris had seen this before. The tears were too polished. The sobs had a rhythm, like lines rehearsed in a mirror. For days, she stonewalled, claimed she had nothing to offer, insisted she had no idea about the debts, the gambling, the wife's secrets. She was just the other woman, a cliche caught in a tragic love story. But then came the leverage. Detectives showed her the bank records, deposits linked to her own account, cash that didn't match her income. They slid over hotel logs showing not just the husband's name, but hers, tied to nights that corresponded with suspicious meetings. And finally, the nail in the coffin, a recording. A voicemail the husband left her just days before his accident. His voice frantic, panicked. "They know. I can't keep this up. If anything happens to me, it's on her." The mistress froze. Her eyes darted to the floor. The fuckhead cracked. Then, finally, the truth began to spill. Asterisk, her confessions started in fragments. Whispered admissions, shaky breaths. She described nights when the husband would pick her up, drive her out to remote diners, and whisper about his wife. He told her his marriage was over in all but name. That his wife controlled the money. That she knew more about his gambling debts than she let on. He said he was suffocating, trapped in a cage, and that the only peace he found was with her. But it wasn't just talk of love. There were deals, meetings, strange men sliding into booths, sliding out minutes later after leaving brown envelopes. At first, she claimed she didn't know what was inside. But when pressed, she admitted money, payments, deals she didn't want to be a part of. but couldn't walk away from Dot one night. She remembered him whispering something that haunted her. If she finds out, I'm dead. You don't know what she's capable of. The detectives leaned forward.
Who was she?
At first, the mistress swore he meant some faceless loan shark's wife, or a woman in the criminal circles he owed. But the more she unraveled, the more it became clear. He was talking about his own wife, the sweet, grieving widow. Wasn't so sweet after all. Asterisk, what truly broke the case open wasn't her confession of love, or even her admissions about the meetings. It was the raw fear she revealed in her final words. She confessed that in the weeks before his death, she begged him to leave, to run, to disappear with her. He promised he would, but then he started receiving threatening messages. Not from loan sharks, not from strangers, from his wife. Messages that weren't just angry, they were surgical. I know where you've been. Don't think I won't act if you embarrass me. Your time is running out. The mistress pulled out her phone, showed them screenshots. The detective's blood ran cold. These weren't the messages of a heartbroken wife. They were the words of a predator tightening a noose. The mistress admitted she had been too scared to come forward earlier, afraid she'd be next. But with the husband dead, with the lies collapsing, she finally whispered what she had held in her chest for weeks. She killed him. I don't know how, but I know it was her. He told me himself, if anything happens to me, it's her. Asterisk, asterisk, the room was cold, sterile, designed to break people down. A plain metal table. 2 chairs. No clock, no windows, just the humming buzz of fluorescent lights. And in the middle of it sat her, the widow, dressed in black as always, her face perfectly made up. Her eyes puffy just enough to remind the world she was still grieving. Detectives had been careful with her until now. They had treated her gently, as if she truly were the victim she claimed to be. But this time was different. Harris entered with a folder, thick, heavy, the kind that told its own story before it was even opened. She straightened her back, flashed a faint, weary smile. She had convinced herself she could charm her way through this just like everything else in her life. But when Harris laid the folder down and said only 4 words, she told us everything. The color drained from her face. The widow blinked. She? She asked. Her voice, for the first time, cracked. Dot and Harris leaned in, his voice low and calm. The mistress? We know about her. We know what your husband told her about you, and now we know what you told him. The act was beginning to crumble. Asterisk, asterisk, she tried denial at first, of course. Claimed the mistress was a liar, a homewrecker, a desperate woman looking for attention. She raised her voice, slammed her hand on the table, even turned on the tears, but detectives had seen it all before. They let her rant. They let her play the victim. Then, when she was out of breath, Harris calmly slid a piece of paper across the table, a printout of her threatening text messages. She froze. The transformation was subtle but chilling. The tears dried up. Her face hardened. Her eyes, once wide in mourning, narrowed into slits of pure calculation. She knew the mask was slipping. She knew they had her. Harris pressed. You said time is running out. You said, don't embarrass me. Those aren't the words of a grieving wife. Those are threats. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she didn't have a ready answer. The silence was deafening. Detectives exchanged a glance. This wasn't the widow anymore. This was the woman beneath. Cold, sharp, ruthless. Asterisk, asterisk, follow the money. That's what Harris always told his rookies. And here, the money spoke louder than any words the widow tried to spin. The husband had been drowning in debt. Gambling losses, unpaid loans, cash advances that ballooned into suffocating sums. Yet, after his death, those debts vanished. Not through magic, not through luck, but through one transaction. Detectives uncovered a life insurance policy worth nearly $500,000. Who was the sole beneficiary? His wife. The widow. At first, she claimed ignorance. said she didn't even know about the policy. But when investigators pulled the original documents, they found her signature, her handwriting on the forms, confirming not only her knowledge, but her active participation in maintaining the policy. Even more damning, a clause. The policy had been updated just months before his so-called accident. A clause that doubled. The payout of his death was ruled accidental. Detectives didn't need to say it out loud. The motive was written in black and white. Her husband's death wasn't just convenient. It was profitable. But money alone doesn't prove murder. They needed something more, something tangible, something undeniable. So the forensic team went back to the crash. They revisited the wreckage of the husband's car. At first glance, it was just that, a tragic accident. A tire blown, a crash into a ditch. But under a microscope, the details told a different story. The brake line wasn't worn. It was cut. Clean, deliberate, no mistaking it. And the angle of the cut suggested not a roadside mishap, but careful tampering by someone who knew what they were doing. Then came the toxicology report. The husband's blood showed traces of sedatives, not enough to kill him, but enough to dull his reflexes. Enough to make him sluggish behind the wheel. Enough to ensure he wouldn't stand a chance once those brakes failed. Piece by piece, the so-called accident began to look like a stage scene. A carefully constructed cover-up designed to look random, but executed with chilling precision. Finally. Detectives turned to the timeline, the unshakable skeleton that holds any case together. And what they found tied the noose even tighter around the widow. Cell phone records placed her near the husband's car hours before the crash. Her explanation? She had gone for a walk. But who walks to an empty stretch of road late at night without calling anyone, without leaving any trace, except those damning pings from her phone? Neighbors also came forward, reluctantly at first. One remembered seeing her slip out of the house that night in dark clothing. Another recalled her coming home later, pale, shaking, clutching something in her hands, though they couldn't see what. And then came the surveillance footage. Grainy, almost useless at first glance. But with enhancement, detectives could see it. A woman in black. Her build and gait unmistakably similar to the widow. Lingering near where her husband's car had been parked. Earlier that evening. The web was no longer unraveling. It was closing. Tight. Inescapable. The widow had grown comfortable again. Too comfortable. Weeks had passed since her last interrogation. And though detectives were tightening the case behind the scenes, she walked the streets of her town as though she still held the sympathy of the world. She wore black dresses to the grocery store, kept her chin high at church, and accepted casseroles from neighbors who whispered words like strong and brave. But while she played the grieving widow in public, the detectives were gathering everything they needed in private. Warrants were signed. Witness statements compiled. Forensics double-checked. Harris and his team worked late nights, ensuring there would be no loophole, no excuse, no last-minute escape. The morning they decided to move was bright and unassuming. The kind of day that makes you think nothing bad could possibly happen. But Harris knew better. He knew what was about to unfold wasn't just an arrest. It was an unveiling, a performance ending in a curtain call she couldn't control. The widow had fooled the town. She hadn't fooled him. It was just after sunrise when the convoy of unmarked police cars rolled silently into her neighborhood. Engines low, radios muted, tires crunching against gravel with surgical precision. Neighbors peeked through blinds, curious, confused. Who were these men in dark jackets, approaching the widow's house with such grim purpose? The knock wasn't polite. It wasn't gentle. It was sharp, commanding, the kind of knock that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. Inside. The widow stirred. She had been sipping coffee at her kitchen table, her phone in hand, scrolling through condolences she still received online. She thought she had outsmarted everyone. The knock came again, harder this time. She frowned, set her cup down, and opened the door with that same tired, practiced, sorrowful look, but when she saw Harris and his team, badges out, she froze. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. For a split second, the mask slipped. Double quotes, Mrs. Crawford. Harris said evenly, "You're under arrest for the murder of your husband." The words hit like a THUNDRCLAP. At first. She tried to play the role one last time. She gasped. She cried. She begged, "No, this isn't right. You've got the wrong person." She reached out toward neighbors who had gathered on their porches, her voice breaking as she called to them. Tell them I loved him. Tell them I could never," but the crowd didn't move. The sympathy they once held evaporated as quickly as morning mist. Some turned their heads. Others whispered. And a few, the ones who had doubted her from the beginning, simply folded their arms and watched. When the cuffs clicked around her wrists, her facade crumbled entirely. The tears stopped. Her face hardened, her voice went cold. She spat at Harris, eyes flashing with venom. "You think you've won? You think this changes anything?" But Harris didn't flinch. He had seen it before, the predator showing its true face when the prey act no longer served. He leaned in, his voice low enough for her alone. "The act is over. Everyone sees you now." As she was led to the car, the community finally understood. The perfect widow, the grieving wife, the pillar of strength, had been nothing more than a mask. Beneath it all was a woman capable of orchestrating her husband's death with chilling precision. And as the door slammed shut behind her, the silence of the neighborhood was broken only by the whispers. She did it. She really did it. The courthouse was packed on the first day of trial. Reporters lined the steps outside, their cameras flashing like lightning as the infamous Black Widow was escorted through the doors in chains. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation. Families clutched purses, neighbors whispered, and even strangers who had driven in from nearby towns filled the gallery. Everyone wanted to witness the downfall of the woman who had fooled them all, the widow. However, didn't arrive looking defeated. No, she came dressed in muted gray. Her hair perfectly styled, her posture elegant, like a queen refusing to abdicate her throne. She even managed a faint, tremulous smile at the jury as if to say, "I am the victim here." Her defense team had crafted the perfect narrative. She was a grieving wife. Harris, and unfairly targeted by police, desperate to pin someone with the crime. The detectives, her lawyer boomed in his opening statement, saw a woman they didn't understand. A strong woman. A survivor. And instead of protecting her, they persecuted her. The jury listened. Some nodded. For a moment, it looked like her mask might work again. But then the prosecutor rose, sharp and steady. He didn't waste words. Instead, he let silence stretch before he said simply, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the story of a grieving widow. This is the story of a cold-blooded killer who murdered the man who trusted her most." The tension was set. The stage was ready. The first days of testimony were a careful unraveling of her lies. The medical examiner described bruises on her husband's arms, signs of a struggle. The crash site investigator detailed how the vehicle had been tampered with, brake fluid drained, seatbelt cut in a way no accident could explain. The courtroom murmured, but the most devastating moment came when detectives presented the phone records. A chart projected onto a large screen showed dozens of calls. Late-night whispers to a man the widow had sworn she barely knew. They played recordings of her voice, soft but unmistakable. Arranging secret meetings at hours her husband thought she was working late. The jury leaned forward. Some gasped, and then came the witnesses. A neighbor recalling how she saw the widow's car parked blocks away from her lover's apartment at 2 a.m. A coworker who testified that the husband had once confided, "I think she's hiding something from me." And finally, the lover himself dragged onto the stand, trembling as he admitted she had told him her husband wouldn't be a problem much longer. Each testimony was a dagger. Each fact another crack in the armor she wore. But the moment that silenced the room came when Detective Harris took the stand. Calm, methodical, he laid out the entire investigation like a puzzle finally solved. He told the jury about the widow's staged tears, her contradictory stories, her cold slip-ups. And when the prosecutor asked, "Detective, in your professional opinion, was this an accident?" Harris turned to the jury and said firmly, "No, it was murder." When it was her turn to testify, the widow stepped into the witness box as though it were a spotlight. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her voice trembling as she recounted the nightmare of losing her husband. She painted herself as a woman wronged, a victim of lies and gossip. For a few minutes, the courtroom seemed to waver. Some jurors even softened, shifting uncomfortably as her story tugged at their emotions. She spoke of her love for her late husband, her grief, her loneliness. She looked at the jury as though pleading for rescue. But then the prosecutor stood, Mrs. Crawford. He said evenly, holding a stack of papers, "If you loved him so much, why did you text your lover? It will all be over soon, 3 days before your husband's accident." The widow froze. The gallery erupted in whispers. The prosecutor read another message aloud. "I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore." Another whisper rippled through the room. Her face tightened. Her tears dried. The mask slipped once again. She stumbled, contradicted herself, snapped at the prosecutor. At one point, she even glared at the jury, the very people whose sympathy she needed not by the time she stepped down. The image of the grieving widow had been shattered. What remained wasn't a victim. It was a manipulator caught in her own web, and when closing arguments came, the prosecutor's words cut like steel. She thought she could fool her husband. She thought she could fool the police. And now she thinks she can fool you. But the evidence tells the truth. And the truth is, she killed him. The trial was over. The lawyers had spoken their final words. The widow had played her last card, staring at the jury with wide, desperate eyes, as though she could still weave her spell. But the jury had been excused. Now everything was in their hands. The widow sat stiffly at the defense table, hands folded neatly on her lap as though she were simply waiting for a dinner reservation to be called. But if anyone looked closely, they would see her knuckles whitening, the faint tremor in her fingertips. The gallery buzzed with a low hum of voices. Neighbors whispered, reporters scribbled notes, and family members sat in tense silence. On one side of the courtroom, the husband's family clutched tissues, their faces pale and exhausted. They had sat through every testimony, every gruesome detail of how their loved one's life had been stolen. This was their last chance at justice. The jury deliberated for hours. Then those hours turned into a day. Each moment dragged like a lifetime. The widow's defense team whispered reassurances. A long deliberation could be good. It means they're unsure. But behind closed doors, the widow herself paced in the holding cell, her composure cracking with each tick of the clock. And then the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. The air in the courtroom shifted. Silence fell like a heavy curtain as the bailiff announced, "All rise. The jury is entering." Every heart skipped. The jurors filed in, one by one, faces grim, eyes forward. No smiles, no glances toward the widow, just solemn silence. That silence told its own story. The widow's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering to keep calm, but her eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. The judge looked at the jury foreman. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreman, a middle-aged man with steady eyes, stood, holding the slip of paper. "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom froze. No one moved. No one breathed. The paper was handed to the bailiff, then to the judge. The judge glanced at it, then returned it to the foreman. "Please read the verdict." The widow straightened, fixing her eyes on the jurors as though daring them to betray her. In the case of the state versus widow's name. The foreman began, voice steady, "On the charge of first-degree murder." A pin drop could have been heard in that room. "We, the jury, find the defendant." Time seemed to slow. The widow's lips parted. The husband's family clutched each other. Guilty. The word rang like a gunshot. Gasps erupted across the courtroom. Reporters' pens scratched furiously. The husband's mother sobbed into her hands. The widow froze, her mask breaking in an instant, her face twisting from disbelief to fury. Then, finally to something hollow. The judge's gavel banged.
Order in the court.
But no one could stop the ripple of emotion spreading through the room. The widow slumped into her chair, her elegant posture gone. The color drained from her face. Her hands, once folded so neatly, now clawed at the table as though searching for something solid to hold on to. For the first time, she looked powerless. The prosecutor sat stone-faced, but inside he felt the weight of vindication. Not joy, but the satisfaction of truth revealed. Detective Harris exchanged a quiet glance with his partner. Years of suspicion, late nights, dead ends. It had all been worth it. The husband's family clung to each other, tears streaming. Justice had not brought him back, but it had spoken for him, finally silencing the lies that had twisted his memory. The widow was led away in handcuffs. This time there was no faint smile, no performance. Just a hollow stare, as though she couldn't believe the world had seen through her after all. And as she was escorted out, the courtroom whispered with one shared thought. She almost got away with it. The verdict didn't just convict her. It unmasked her forever. The community that once pitied her would now remember her as what she truly was, not a grieving wife, but a killer.